So let's look at what I think is the best of his meditations, one in its entirety, and then a couple of samples from later ones. And you'll get the idea. They read very similarly to one another. You can read all these all day, but the fact is that most of them are quite similar to one another. This is 1:8, meditation 1:8, and of course it begins with a text, John 6:51, I am the living bread. And he's going to take that text, he's going to sort of sift it through, or chew through it, or sort through it, or meditate on that text. You see, hence the meditation. Now it's very difficult. I got to stop every now and then as I read through this. Discovering through astronomy divine, meaning divine astronomy, the world's bright battlement wherein I spy a golden path my pencil cannot line. Now, the visual here is, the view that the universe is kind of like this dome. The stars out there, the outer space they don't have the same view of space that we do. They see it as kind of a canopy or a dome that's kind of circular shaped over our heads. And so the stars are out there on this battlement. And from up there, way up there, beyond where you can see, a sort of beam of light, think like a laser beam of light, a golden, he says, a golden path my pencil cannot line. From that bright throne, God's throne, unto my threshold lies. So there's like a laser beam of golden light that goes from way beyond the stars where heaven is, all the way to my front porch. And while my puzzled thoughts about it pour, I find the bread of life in it at my door. So right there at the bottom where the beam of light hits my threshold, there's the bread of life, bread, right there. And not just any bread, of course. You know that the bread of life is a metaphor for Christ, right? When that this bird of paradise, his soul, right, put in this wicker cage, his body, my corpse, to tweedle praise, right, the chief end of man is to praise God, had pecked the fruit forbid, right? What was the fruit forbid? Well, it was in the Garden of Eden, right? All of us sinned in Adam's fall. We sin it all, right? So Adam's sin was my sin. He fell, I fell. When my soul in this wicker cage, your skeleton kind of is like a wicker cage, isn't it? To tweedle praise. When I had pecked the forbidden fruit, and so did fling away its food, and lost its golden days, it fell into celestial famine sore, and never could attain a morsel more. Alas, alas, poor bird, what wilt thou do? This creature's field no food for souls e'er gave. Look at that. Look how convoluted that syntax is. This creature's field no food for souls ever gave. Right? And if thou knock at angels' doors, they show an empty barrel. They no soul bread have. Look at that. They have no soul bread. They have no bread for your soul. But he doesn't say it that way. He writes it, they no soul bread have, right? Sentence writes he in convoluted fashion, right? Alas, poor bird, the world's white loaf is done, and cannot yield thee here the smallest crumb. You're damned, you're doomed. We have no... So look at the despair section of the poem, all right? But look, here comes the joy that he senses at the prospect of salvation. In this sad state, God's tender bowels, by the way, the bowels are your guts, and they thought that that was the seat of your emotions, right? Today we say the heart. They would say the bowels. Oh, I feel for you in my bowels. Really? What did you eat? In this sad state, God's tender bowels run out streams of grace. Now, I'm not going to try to get too graphic on you, but is that what you think it means? Oh, yes, indeed it is. God's grace to him is nothing more than diarrhea. To us, it's magnificent, marvelous. But to him, it's nothing. Shocking conceit, I'd say so. And he, to end all strife, the purest weed in heaven, his dear, dear son, grinds and kneads up into this bread of life. Christ, of course, went through all kinds of torment and torture. His body was ground and beaten, right? Which bread of life from heaven down came and stands. Came down, down came. And stands, right? Dished in thy table up by angels' hands. Look at this. Look at what God did for us. We, this wretched thing, he bothered to do this for us. Unbelievable sacrifice. The joy that accompanies this is amazing. You know, it's unbelievable that God would actually do this. Now comes a question, and this is the hope section, because it's not certainty, a question. Did God mold up this bread of heaven and bake, which from his table came, and to thine goest? The answer to that question is yes. Doth he bespeak thee thus? This soul bread take, come, eat thy fill of this thy God's white loaf. It's food too fine for angels, yet come, take and eat thy fill. It's heaven's sugar cake. This is a certainty, right? That he has provided it. But does he speak to me that way? Is he telling me it's for me? That question, it goes unanswered. What grace is this need in this loaf? This thing's souls are but petty things it to admire. Look at that. To admire it to admire. The syntax. Ye angels, help. This fill wood to the brim. This would fill to the brim. This fill wood to the brim. Heaven's whelmed down crystal meal bowl, yea, and higher. This bread of life dropped in thy mouth doth cry. Eat, eat me, soul, and thou shalt never die. God has done all of this for you. To him it's nothing, but to us it's phenomenal amounts of grace and pity and love and compassion. Gave his only son, allowed him to be beaten and sacrificed for our sake. Gives it to us, brings it to our doorstep. Even in that last pair of lines, this bread of life dropped in thy mouth. But of course, when you take communion, right? You put it into your mouth, or the priest does. Dropped in your mouth says, eat me, soul, and thou shalt never die. But you notice one thing in that last pair of line, that last couplet. You don't see him eat it, do you? It wants to be eaten. It's begging you to eat it. It's begging you to accept. But he can never know for sure if he's of the elect. He can never know for sure. He wouldn't wrap up the poem saying, and I ate it, and I swallowed it, and I felt great, and I'm going to heaven. Thank goodness my ticket is punched, and I am passed through, bags checked all the way to the pearly gates. I'm good. No, he would never say that, right? Because he's a Puritan, right? He can get you all the way up. God will even drop it in your mouth. But will you eat it? Oh, you don't ever know, do you? You just don't know. Let's skip over to 139, if you would. Meditation 139. And just look at a couple of things here, especially related to the structure. You'll see it again. The first 3 stanzas are despair. Then you get 3 more stanzas or so that are sort of this middle emotion of joy, joy, right? My sin, my God. Look at the first line. My sin, my God, these cursed dregs, green, yellow, blue streaked, poison, hellish, rank, bubs hatched in nature. It's disgusting imagery, right? It's shocking, disgusting imagery, very metaphysical there. I cannot kill nor cope with them. My curbs is less than a snaffle in their mouth, that my reins, etc. And so by hell they're spurred, etc. Methinks I spy thou graciously displayed. There is an advocate. Right? Then comes joy. Joy, God's sons, the sinner's advocate, doth plead the sinner's guiltless and a saint, but yet attorneys, please spring from the state. The case is in. If bad, it's bad in plaint, right? Look at the lawyer's plea metaphor that he's using. It's like I'm on trial, but I've got to get out of hell free pass because God paid it for me. Jesus is taking my sacrifice. He's taking my sin upon me. If I'm of the elect, if I am predestined to accept the grace. I accept it. I have to accept it. But will I fully accept it? Will I accept it throughout my lifetime? Will I ever fail to accept it? Right? That you can't know. Part 3 is the last 2 stanzas. What shall I do, my Lord? What do? That I may have thee plead my case. I fee thee will with faith, repentance, and obediently thy service against satanic sins fulfill. I'll fight thy fields while live I do. Although I should be hacked in pieces by the foe. What can I do to get you to be my advocate in that court, that eternal judgment seat? Jesus, be my advocate. Take my case. Plead it. Get mercy for me. Make me thy friend. I'll do I'll give you my whole life. I will. Be my surety. I will be thy client. Be my advocate. My sins make thine. Thy pleas make mine hereby. Thou wilt me save. I will thee celebrate. Thou'lt kill my sins that cut my heart within, and my rough feet shall thy smooth praises sing. It's a sort of mutual relationship. He's asking, he's begging, he's almost trying to reassure himself that he can do something to ensure his salvation. I can do something for God, but he can never be sure of it, right? He doesn't say he will do it. He says, I promise I'll try to do it, and I'll give it everything I've got, right? In the next one, right below that, 2.1, Meditation 2.1, look at the typological references that are throughout it, right? So you see the structure, you see the typology here as well. Down in the third stanza, the glory of the world slicked up in types, in all choice things chosen to typify his glory, upon whom the work doth light. To thine's a shadow or a butterfly. The glory of all types doth meet in thee, right? So, and one of those types is that Jesus is the new man, Adam is the old man. Adam brought sin, Jesus brings salvation. So he's a sort of a type, right, of the Old Testament. The Old Testament is the New Testament revealed. The New Testament is the Old Testament is the New Testament concealed. The New Testament is the Old Testament revealed kind of notion that we talked about a little bit earlier. He goes on line 30, that particular stanza in 2:2, with the firstborn's antitype, in whom they were enshrined. And you can see it all throughout. If you look at 2:4, for example, types, types, types. Then, my blessed Lord, let not the bondsman's type take place in me, but thy blessed promised seed. And so he's really hung up on that. He really thinks very much about history, biblical history, types, Old Testament, New Testament, paralleling one another. He really doesn't use it much to talk about Puritans in New England. He's more interested in types theologically than he is sort of, in terms of current events, current affairs. He's not trying to take the typology thing and apply it to the day-to-day things. But he is seeing sort of these relationships between the Old and New Testament. Anyway, as you can see, Edward Taylor, very, very complex guy. Just skimming the surface here just so you can get a flavor of how to go about reading them, what to be looking for in them, what themes are in there, what techniques are being used, where he's getting all this from. Very much a late 17th century poet. The next part 2 of this class, which I'll post in a day or two, will deal with the minor poets, starting with Wigglesworth and others, and Uriah and Oakes and these kinds of guys, who deserve to be looked at, although they're probably never going to be remembered in the same league as Bradstreet and Taylor.